We all want to, like make our lives count, right? Spend our time on stuff that like really matters. But it's easy to forget about that with like all the crazy stuff going on.
Yeah.
So today we're going to take a deep dive into some really cool ideas about like figuring out what actually matters and putting that first.
Yeah, and what's cool about this thing we're looking at is how it's set up. Like it doesn't just like throw a bunch of random ideas at you, you know? It starts with like the super basic stuff everyone needs and kind of like guides you from there to making like a bigger impact on the world.
It's like, I don't know, building a house or something.
Yeah.
Got to have that solid foundation before you start putting in the fancy stuff. And speaking of foundations, this source really focuses on how our basic needs, food, a place to live, even friends. It's not like you check them off a list and you're done.
Right.
You eat till you're full, but guess what? Tomorrow, you're going to be hungry again.
Totally. It's such a simple thing, but when you really think about it, it changes how you see your choices, you know? It's like most of life isn't about getting to some finish line where you're satisfied forever. It's more like understanding that your needs kind of come and go and figuring out a good way to deal with that.
Yeah, it's not just about like grabbing another slice of pizza, right?
Yeah.
This goes way beyond like the physical stuff. This source talks about things like basic human rights and feeling safe and secure. It says those are like essential to survive, not just like bonus points.
For sure. Like imagine trying to like work on yourself or make a difference when you're constantly worried about your safety or if your basic rights are even going to be a thing, you know? It makes you think, how often are those needs or the lack of them affecting us? Like even in small ways we don't realize.
Totally. It's like when you're super stressed, you just can't think about anything else until you feel safe and secure again.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. This source is like, we're not meant to just survive. We're meant to thrive.
And that's where we move past just like meeting those basic needs and get into what it really means to flourish. This source talks about dignity and not like some vague idea, but like as a core part of thriving. Like it says that knowing you're valuable is like essential for a good life.
So it's not just about good self-esteem, right? It's about knowing deep down that you deserve respect, that what you say matters, that you bring something unique to the table that no one else does.
Exactly. And building on that idea of dignity, it goes into the difference between just being happy and really flourishing. Like it says flourishing is about living with purpose, always growing and becoming a better version of yourself and making the world a better place, you know?
It's like the difference between a plant barely surviving in the shade and one that's like bursting with life in the sunshine. Like we all have that potential to flourish, but it definitely takes effort and doing it on purpose.
And that's where things can get tricky because the source also points out all these like distractions and dead ends that can totally throw us off course, you know, stuff like getting caught up in ego and status or always needing more and more, bigger and better.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's like that saying, comparison is the thief of joy. We get so caught up in everyone else and what they have, we forget what actually brings us joy.
And this source says that like always needing other people's approval can actually hurt our ability to connect, find purpose, and just be happy.
It's a good reminder to check in with ourselves sometimes, like, are we spending our time on things that'll disappear quickly or things that are really valuable? And speaking of spending time, this source had a really interesting take on boredom. Like, it's not just a feeling, it's like a call to action.
Yeah. Like instead of just, you know, grabbing our phones or whatever when we're bored, the source is like, hey, what if we saw boredom as a chance to grow? It's like, it's telling us we might be out of sync with ourselves, you know, like we're craving something more, something that actually lights us up.
It's like that feeling when you finally put down your phone and do something that makes you feel alive. Like, we actually have the power to make our lives awesome and full of stuff that matters.
Totally. And the cool thing is this source doesn't just leave us hanging with these big ideas. It actually gives us some tools.
Right. Like, how do we actually find those things that make us feel alive?
Exactly. There's a whole section about spending your time on what matters, and it's not just theory, it's like practical tips, you know? It's like,
Yeah.
hey, let's get real about where your time actually goes. Like, what are those sneaky things that eat up your day?
It's so easy to get to the end of the day and be like, wait, where'd the time go?
Yeah. But this source is also like, don't just stop at cutting out distractions. It's about deciding on purpose how you want to spend your time, you know, being intentional about it. Yes. And that's where it gets really powerful. It's about knowing your values, figuring out what's most important to why you, and then actually building your life around that. Making choices that reflect what you care about.
It's the difference between just drifting along and actually Like grabbing the steering wheel and deciding where you want to go.
Exactly. It's about realizing you have choices, you know? You have the power to create your own experience. And one of the things it talks about, which is kind of intense but really makes you think, is like the regrets people have when they're dying.
Okay, yeah, that sounds kind of dark, but I get it. It makes you think. Why focus on that, though?
Well, the source says that when we think about the things people regret at the end of their lives, it shows us what's really important, you know? Like, it reminds us that our time is limited, and it makes us ask, how can I live so I don't have regrets? How can I live a life that feels meaningful?
It's about being intentional.
Right.
Like if you knew you only had so much time left, what would you do differently? What would suddenly become a priority?
Exactly. It's about figuring out what you'd regret not doing, you know, not saying, not going after, and then actually having the guts to change things, and now W.
It's like living with a sense of urgency, but not in a panicked way, just like in a way that makes you want to make every day count.
Yeah.
One thing that keeps coming up for me is this whole idea of legacy, like what we leave behind, the impact we have. We talked about it earlier with family and kids, but I feel like it's bigger than that.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. This source definitely doesn't limit legacy to just like physical stuff we pass down. It's about the mark we leave on the world, you know? The people we touch, the things we contribute, the love we put out there.
So it's not about achievements or possessions, but like the energy we bring to the world, how we make other people feel, the positive changes we inspire.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is this source connects those personal reflections on what matters to these big global issues, like
Yeah.
how to actually make the world better.
It's like zooming out, looking at the bigger picture. But how does working on ourselves and figuring out what matters to us connect to something as huge as like global problems?
That's where it gets really cool. The source talks about the global goals for sustainable development. It's like 17 goals made by the United Nations, you know, to deal with stuff like poverty, hunger, inequality, climate change, all the big problems.
Yeah, it's kind of overwhelming when you think about it. But I don't think it's saying we all have to like drop everything and single-handedly solve world hunger, right?
No, not at all. It's more about understanding that we're all connected, you know? Our choices, even the small ones, they matter. They have ripple effects. The source says that by aligning our values with those global goals, we can start making choices that contribute to a better world.
So it's about realizing that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And it's about finding ways to live our values, not just for ourselves, but for the planet, for everyone.
Exactly. It's like realizing that our actions, even if they seem small, they have the power to make a difference.
It's like we've got this awesome map, right?
Yeah.
And it not only shows us the way to like a happy life, but also to a better world. And what I really dig is it encourages us to keep asking those big questions.
Yeah.
Like what really matters.
Yeah, and it reminds us that the answers might change, you know? What's important to us now might be different later on, like as we grow and change. The important thing is to stay curious, to be open to new ideas, and never stop learning and trying new things.
And speaking of learning new stuff, this source doesn't just like drop these big ideas on us and peace out. There's a whole further reading section with tons of suggestions if you want to really geek out on this stuff.
Oh, yeah, that's one of my favorite things about it. It makes you want to keep digging, you know? Keep asking questions and pushing the limits of what you thought you knew. Like it gets that figuring out what matters is a journey, not a destination.
Totally. It's like opening a door to a whole library full of books you didn't even know existed. Anything in the further reading that stood out to you?
You know, there was this one book, Flush. It goes into the whole science of happiness, like what actually makes people thrive. What really got me was it said that what it means to truly thrive, it's always changing. There's always more to learn and discover about living a life that's meaningful.
So it's not about finding happiness and then that's it. It's more about always growing, always discovering new things that make your life feel, well,
Exactly. And it made me think about that whole legacy thing we were talking about. If our ideas of what matters can change, then what we leave behind, that changes too, right?
yeah.
It's not just something fixed. It's about the impact we have on the world every single day.
Whoa, it's deep. So it's not just the big things, but like the small acts of kindness, the times we're brave, the way we show compassion, all those little things make a difference.
This whole deep dive has been a good reminder that life is short and we get to choose how we spend it. By focusing on what truly matters to ourselves, our people, and the world, we can live with purpose, joy, and feel like, we're really living.
It's been so awesome diving into all this with you today. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive got you thinking and maybe even inspired you to focus on what matters most to you. Until next time, keep asking those big questions and keep chasing those things that light you up.